Hello.
Hello.
What's your name? Can you tell us more about yourself?
My name is Julia Khadijah Abdurrahman. I am 30 years old. So I've lived on the island intermittently since I was 6 weeks old. I have 5 children. Their ages are 11, 9, 6, 4, and 3. Yeah.
Okay, great. And can you tell me what's your experience with the island? Like, how do you like it? How would you describe it?
I always had mixed feelings. I always tell people that it's everything that you would imagine about a small town in America. So there is that sensibility of, especially when I was growing up in the late 80s, early 90s, that everybody knew your name. And at that point, it was only the wire buildings, Westview, Island House, River Cross, and Eastwood. So the population was probably, if not 2/3, maybe a half of what it is today, around 14,000. And when my parents moved here, I was a toddler, so I don't remember, but in 1990, the train station was built. So they were here, there was only the tram or to drive over the Roosevelt Island Bridge to get out. So it was a really, I think, insular community. And there's still a sense of that now. And there's some things that are really nice about it. Like I can send my 6-year-old and my 9-year-old to the playground across the street and look at them out the window. And if they're doing anything they're not supposed to, somebody's calling me or messaging me on Facebook. But I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that if we were in Midtown Manhattan. So I really do appreciate aspects about that. But there's also a level of provincialism that really does drive me up the wall. And I feel like there is sometimes I feel it feels kind of like Pleasantville. I don't know if people have seen that movie, or like Leave It to Beaver. Like everything is very nice and very pure on the outside, and nobody is running around in Klan robes. But you just notice, like, who gets invited to birthday parties and who doesn't. Or people are so excited when they see them playing, hi, the kids are getting so big, and then they're calling the cops on your kid, And I really struggle with how to negotiate that, particularly for me, because in this point in my life, a lot of my schedule, a lot of my time centers around the kids and their needs, and I have to spend a lot of time on the playground, spend a lot of time interacting with people. And playground politics I find very, very difficult. And particularly like the lack of transparency. So you see, like on the brochure, it's like we value diversity so much, but again, it's like who gets invited to the play dates, or you'll notice like you get to the playground and it's kind of empty, but then more black kids start coming in, and so you look around and all the white people left, and nobody ever says anything. You just notice like everybody cleared out, or they feel the need to like publicly discipline your kid. Or for me in particular, being a single parent of color, and having 5, like, I'm biracial, but my kids are much more visibly African American. People constantly assume all types of crazy stuff. Like I have people come up to cab drivers and ask me if that's their father. I've had people confide like really detailed sexual stories by the sprinkler, because they assume that I just must be some kind of like hedonist, that I have so many kids at my age. They just assume that I'm like really a freak, and I like desperately want to know their like sexual details.
Interesting.
And in particular with the police, like my one son, he's 9 now. He was 8 last summer, and he was, or actually it was last spring, and he was digging. He has autism. He's like, he gets like really hyper focused on certain things. So typically as a trains, it has been like pretty consistent, and as it is in the community. But for a while he was really into rocks, which led him into digging, and he like begged me for 3 months from this like giant grave digger sized shovel from Amazon. So finally I gave in and I bought the boy the shovel. And then he was like digging in the field in Alois Park, like across the street from our house. And somebody called the police on him, and the police came, the public safety department, and they told him that he cannot be digging there, and that if he doesn't get a digging permit, that they're going to threaten him with arrest. And then I said, okay, well, he needs a permit to dig he's an 8-year-old with a shovel, right? So they said, you're not allowed to dig right here. So I said, where in the field are you allowed to dig? So then they said, some corner by the tree. So I said, okay, Keisha, go dig over there. And then I had to take my other kids to the bathroom. So I go upstairs, just in the bathroom, I come down, and he's just crying and like depressed when I get downstairs. I'm like, what happened? And he said the police came back again and they said that they're going to arrest me if I continue digging. And I mean, first of all, the kid is like really addicted to screens, and we have all these like various in-home therapists working with us to try to get him off of Minecraft. So finally I succeed. The kid wants to spend time outside, and now you've basically criminalized the little outdoor time that he had. And you know, how do I always struggle with like how, you know, I want them to feel safe. I want them to think that there's, you know, that the world is a place where they can explore and be inquisitive, but at the same time there's this like constant reminder that it doesn't matter what questions you have, you always will be black, we will always call the cops on you. And what really made me really, what was really hard for me was that there was another parent standing there. And this parent was, I don't know, looks kind of similar to me. You know, they were, let's just say they were a person of color. And I wondered in my head, like I wondered if it was them, but I didn't know. So I kind of kept that to myself. And then I was speaking to a group of white parents at baseball practice like a week or two later, and I was describing the story to them because in addition to the fact that they threatened him with arrest, after they confronted my son, the public safety officer walked back to the precinct, then came back in a car with cones and caution tape and drove back to the park, put cones, orange cones all around the holes that he dug, which were maybe like 3 inches deep or something, and surrounded the hole with orange cones and then filled it with caution tape. And, you know, the thing is, like, the water fountain, gaping hole, 3 months, never fixed it. The basketball hoops haven't worked, 6 months, finally get new ones, right? But this required, like, an immediate response. And I was, like, cracking up to the parents, talking about, like, how much money, taxpayer dollars, went towards this public safety officer responding to a hole, right? And the white parents were like, oh my God, that's unbelievable, who would do this, you know? And that parent that I thought was the one who called, and I didn't want to think that, they were like, well, that was a danger to society. He should not have been digging holes in that part. What if somebody stepped in a hole? They could have broken their ankle. And, you know, something that I deal with and I feel is really, really hard is that this is the type of stuff that we do to each other. You know, and I know that on this island, like, it's the single black parents, the Spanish parents, the people that don't really have a lot of economic resources that are calling ACS on each other. The attorneys, the doctors, yeah, they might smoke weed and they might do these other things, but they're not calling ACS on each other. They're not calling the police on each other. You know, they might make little comments or be exclusive, but they don't do that. We do that to each other, right? We have been it's so normative to have all of these different things being intruding into our lives, right? And I struggle with that on the island even now as I'm trying to take a more active public role and opening up this kind of civic engagement. Sometimes the most pushback I get are from people who are just like me, who came from the same part of the community as me. And, you know, I struggle with how to navigate that. And even within my own family, that's something that I think about a lot. And part of it is that I acknowledge that, like, as a biracial person, first generation American, like, English is my first language, I have certain privileges, right? And I think that I've made it to a certain place in my life in part because of my adjacency to whiteness, which there was like a really great article about this in the New York Times. And like part of it is, yeah, like, you know, like colorism within people of color, that like, oh, somebody might say that I'm more pretty because of my hair texture or my skin color, or, you know, I'm not black, like I'm just, you know, like I could pass. Like, why? I've even had people be like, well, like, why bother? Like, why not just be Spanish? Like, as if it's something you could convert to, right? But the other thing that it was talking about, even saying about Obama, like, and I think Ta-Nehisi Coates talks about this, is that he had such amicable relationships with white people who sincerely wanted him to succeed that a lot of people have never had access to, right? And I think that's part of it. And like something that I think about is that my in-laws, like their father's side of the family for my kids, they're like multi-generation African American, right? And for me, my paternal great-grandfather was born around like 1803 in Jimma, like the countryside of Ethiopia. And you know, he was a descendant of this king, Abba Jafar. They lived in a time of like relative prosperity. I mean, they weren't cash wealthy, but they had a lot of land. There was a coffee plantation, and you know, they had a surplus. Like, Ethiopian culture is very much about chewing chat, which is kind of similar to weed, except you chew it like tobacco, and sitting around and eating. And we have like this very rich oral tradition, which partially was because work was not a central part of being alive or making a contribution. Like, people really didn't have to work that hard. There was a surplus. A lot of it is like about sitting up and eating and relaxing and eating forever. And like Jimma is very into like the coziness of life. Like is very into like how can we chill. Like if you go to somebody's house and they're from Jimma, like they always have like kind of like beanbag chairs. There's no IKEA, but we have the same kind of sensibility. There's even outfits that men have that are almost like skirts that are for like relaxing, just so we can get like air coming through, right? And you know, so 1803, like 57 years prior to the Emancipation Proclamation, within 3 generations, I can locate a country that, like genetically, like a country that has never been colonized, where there was no sense of being othered in that way. I mean, they did have, I don't mean to like make it sound like paradise, they did have economic, like intra-ethnic infighting, right? But there was not this, there was not active enslavement, like there was no middle passages coming from there in the way there was in this country. And for my kids, their paternal great-grandmother is 70, you know, so 3 generations back for them is Jim Crow. And I think that when you're talking about locating hope, right, and, you know, do you have social connections? Within 3 generations, you have somebody that can remember what it's like not to be dehumanized. I think is really critical. And I try to remember that because sometimes I get mad, you know, it's like, why, I'm trying to help us, you trying to tear me down. And I think about, like, what does it take to break somebody? What does it take to make somebody hate themselves? And to see somebody successful and want to tear them down, because people, you know, everybody should come back into their place, and it's really hard navigating this, like especially in trying to raise my own children, and you know, even like I'm like pro black everything. We got hip hop on, we're like reading Ta-Nehisi Coates. They're misbehaving. I'm making you do a paper on Nina Simone, like, and we go to the playroom in our building, and my daughter and this other francophone African 2-year-old that's like our neighbor, they were only playing with the white dolls, you know, these like black, like this, you know, caricature white dolls, blonde hair. And I'm like, I say to my daughter, like, every morning I'm like, you beautiful chocolate baby, you know, I'm like, we do a whole thing with doing the hair. And I try to, like, you know, in our house we have like their art that they make themselves. We have like Ethiopian cane, you know, like I try to constantly expose them to all of this culture. And we have black dolls in our house. She doesn't want to play with them, you know. And I think that part of what I try to figure out is that I have this whole like global vision. I want to change like the whole world, and at the same time, like my agency is not as unlimited as I might desire. And in raising my own children, I have to accede that I only have so much control. Like I try to influence it, and I try to constantly reinforce certain things with them. But at the end of the day, when they go into that playroom, they're going into a playroom where the toys were picked out before we got there. You know, there's a group of children who go on into their own families, and I can't micromanage all of that. Like I can bring them, I can pick certain playgrounds. I can't control the kids that are going to come, right? And they're constantly getting these other messages of that they are less than, you know, they don't belong here. And you know, I really don't have the answers, and it's really hard. What else was I gonna say?
So as you see your children struggling with, you know, issues of not feeling as though they belong or self-hate, I mean, can you reflect on your own? I mean, can you see some similarities between your own experiences with similar issues growing up? Like, do you see you and your children having, because you spent a lot of time on the island as a child, and your children are spending a lot of time on the island as children.
So, yeah, so I mean, part of how I came to racial awareness is that my mother, as a white woman, I mean, I think this is, in her defense, she's, in the last couple of years, kind of gotten it together, but I feel like there's an issue with an interracial coupling when white women have a child by a person of color. They often feel like that mixed child is their flag on the moon, like they are no longer racist, they got this brown baby now, I'm not racist, look, he brown, like, you know, it's a whole thing. And I think my mother felt a little bit like that. She came from Juniata Park, Philadelphia, this Irish Catholic, all white town, and, you know, most people didn't leave Juniata Park, never mind, and, you know, make it to New York. And then she got like, this was like she was adopted by her grandfather, who was like a sheet metal worker. So for her to make it to NYU and to become a nurse and have like a professional job, that was like its own thing. And then like growing up in Juniata Park, everybody went to Catholic school. And so her grandmother would give her coins because the nuns asked them to bring in change to name the pagan babies in the benighted dark continent of Africa because they were savages whose souls needed to be saved, right? And so I think from her to come from that background in like the 1950s America and then marry this Ethiopian professional and met in a bar or whatever, I think she felt like, I did it, I made it, I was done. And she mostly didn't, there was a lot of things we didn't talk about, including race, which is why I think I talk so much, and I'm like, no filter, like, I will not tolerate, like, anything being passive, ever, like, my radar for fakeness is so, I'm like, I don't allow that. And just for an example of this, how this intersects with Roosevelt Island was that I attended the Roosevelt Island Day Nursery, I believe, in 1991, and at that time they took ACS vouchers, which created more racial and socioeconomic diversity because ACS vouchers is how the majority of people with a lower socioeconomic status enter into preschool, enter into daycare settings in New York City. And that's actually one of the reasons why preschool is so segregated. So anyway, I went there and I got expelled. So I got expelled for running away during nap time naked, and I hit some other kid with a block, like in addition to other things. But they told my mother that we had parent-child disorder and that we were fundamentally mismatched as parent and child.
What is that? I've never heard of that before.
So I don't think it actually exists as a diagnosis anymore, especially not for like biological families. But they told her that, and I have like the paper, like this is what was written down, that we're fundamentally mismatched as parent and child. They never used race as a descriptor, but they said that she was too nice and too permissive and unprepared to deal with me, who was too wild and too out of control and aggressive and dangerous, right? And I think that kind of sums up my feelings on race on Roosevelt Island, right? Because everybody says diversity, we'll do these different things, and they never mention race, right? They never brought it up. But you have this white woman and she's told, like, you guys don't fit. She has to go somewhere else. It's like some kind of serious emotional distress. It's not working. You might have like had a child. It's just like kind of crazy to think about, right? And for me, I proceeded to get expelled from like many other schools after that, and ultimately went to like this residential behavior modification center when I was 12. And in that environment where they used isolation as a form of punishment, where the majority of kids were in foster care, where I would see or experience things like kids being locked in a room where the only thing there was like a camera on the ceiling and a plexiglass cube and a drain in the floor because they wouldn't let you go out to use the bathroom, right? That really shaped my experience and my passions in the world, because I feel like I both have two parents who are like got their master's degrees from Columbia, like very well educated, if not like financially privileged, like privileged by family structure and like different immigration aspects, right? And at the same time, I spent the majority of my time coming of age with kids who are probably the most disenfranchised people in America, kids in foster care whose parental rights have been terminated, legal orphans, right? And so I feel that has really shaped kind of what I prioritize and like my interpretation of the world, because the other thing is that we were at this other location, most people don't know schools like this continue to exist. Quiet rooms, they were isolation rooms, they were called quiet rooms, sometimes now they're renamed as sensory rooms. They exist all over the country now. There's one in Child School on the Roosevelt Island, right? And I think a lot about the institutional history of this island, and that like during the time of Nellie Bly's like 10 Days in a Madhouse, that there was a lot of public interest on like, what do we do to the insane? Who are we imprisoning? Because it was so visible. You have this concentration of all of these people and these institutions on an island. So it's like very in your face, right? And we had this deinstitutionalization movement, 70s, 80s, right? You're closing down long-term hospitalization for the mentally ill. But there were some great things that happened there and some awful facilities that were shut down. But a lot of that meant that people it's not just deinstitutionalization, it was just like redistribution and decentralization, and things are spread out. Things are not as visible to people. And like there's the racial segregation, there's the segregation of who we consider to be insane and who do we consider to be educated. And I think, and there's a lot of loss of human connection there. And I guess all to your question is that with my kids, I bring that up with them too, because sometimes they feel like their lives are over because I ask them to put their shoes away, and I want them to know that I am doing my best to give them access to the resources that are going to help them succeed. And I do like preempt, like for one of my sons, he attends like a predominantly white institution, a private school, like an elementary school, and I know that there's an emotional cost associated with that, and we speak about that. But they have like unparalleled resources that I wouldn't otherwise be able to give him access to, and I want him to be able to have those kind of resources. You can't replace it. And at the same time, the other day we were in the train station, and he saw one of his friends, and the friend was saying something about some party bag from this other boy's party that he went to yesterday. And my son Jay Sean, he hadn't gone to the party, and the boy was like, I saw you there. And my son was like, no, that's Donovan, like the other skinny black boy, And so at 6 years old, to immediately know that this other, your peer is like once again assuming that you're the other black, and they don't look alike at all, actually. And it's not easy, and I have to own up to him. Is that fair, right? How does that equation play out over time? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that for him.
Going back to what you mentioned about when you were saying we do this to each other, talking about other groups of marginalized people, I guess, working to police one another. How do you address that? Like, do you think that in a way we can be our own worst enemies when it comes to, I guess, keeping racism intact and working full force?
Absolutely, but you cannot understand that without understanding the history. Like, the biggest thing is when I encounter somebody who I cannot stand, like this person is driving me crazy, I really try to stop and pause and be like, what happened to you? How do you break someone? How do you make someone hate themselves?
Have you read the Willie Lynch letters?
It is, although that's kind of apocryphal though.
I know.
But there's
it's a
real
good illustration.
Yeah, it's a good illustration. It was pretty deep. First of all, like, people don't understand, like,
that's what really happened, though.
It's an aspect. I think, like, just Willie Lynch himself is like apocryphal. No, but like we're really, there's an amnesia about like things that happen. I was just thinking about the fact that like a lot of the people who came over in the Middle Passages were teenagers, right? And you saw your face on like.
No, I'm really trying to absorb this because I have some questions because I think about this often. Like I think about it a lot, particularly as a Black American, because I'm starting to move on the sides I'm looking at. I feel like I myself am feeling like I have to conform more, and I see myself trying to conform more, right? Because I'm like, okay, it does have utility, right? So like I'm thinking to myself, like, I want access to this information, so I'm not gonna be like I was before. Like I'm not, because I was a troubled kid too. Like I grew up in a home of foster children. Like I was always put out of school. I was putting time out every day. Like, and so at a point I'm like, and I'm looking at my parents like, okay, look, I don't really want to be like them. Like I don't want to have these financial issues. I don't want to be ostracized all the time. So I have this internal struggle, and I'd like to, I guess, understand, I'd like to hear what you think about it. Like, because like, how do you balance this? Like, how do you balance like wanting to be Black, wanting to be unapologetically Black, but at the same time like understanding that comes with a cost, and that conforming a little bit also has some upside to it in the type of networks you'll get access to, and the type of opportunities you'll have access to, right? So it's kind of like that's heavy. That's real heavy. And it's like when you say like what happened to you, right? It makes me, the reason why I made that face, because I'm like, I'm thinking about myself. Like, what happened to me? Like, I want opportunity so bad that I'm willing to like change certain things about myself, or like maybe not even show certain things about myself or about my culture, about my upbringing. And that definitely comes at a cost. But that's something I deal with every day. Yeah.
No, what you're saying just made me think of my new love, Twitter. So I was reading this thing about untherapy, and it was this woman saying that she wants to be an untherapist, and she's saying we don't need more therapists, we need more co-narrators that can help enrich people's experience and help them create like narrative maps to help them make sense of what happened to them, or like where are they in relationship to someone else or to this period of time, right? And I think that telling our story, thinking about what happened to other people, learning how to listen to other people when they share those experiences is part of the answer. I don't necessarily think that there's not this end point that I can say, look, this is what you have to do. Mm-hmm. And I've made decisions that came at a cost. I am unapologetically black, and I have no filter, and there's a lot of people that don't like me for that. Mm-hmm. And it's not necessarily the interpersonal dislike that becomes an issue, but it does become an issue when it's somebody in a position of power. You know, I would have, there's opportunities that I don't have access to because I am on Front Street every day. That's not acceptable. You need to decolonize this. I'm bringing this up. Like, I will not, you know, I'm part of many different identities. And, you know, I struggle with, like, Ethiopian people, like, we're, like, the bedrock of civilization. They have this whole kind of thing about, like,
they can be West Africa.
Though.
They left them in, anti-black news.
No, they say like in West Africa they left them in too long in the oven.
See, right? I mean, they took them out too early. It's like Ethiopians are notorious for that. Like, we're the better Africans. Like,
no, but the thing is also Ethiopians are like Dominicans. So we have like I have full 100% Ethiopian first cousins who are much lighter and much more white appearing than me. And I have my uncle is like black, like what people consider of like be a Maasai or something like that. Gambela is actually the darkest region, and they like border Sudan, right? So Ethiopia is a very mixed, is a racially mixed community. But yeah, no, when I went to Ethiopia, my son was sick, so I didn't bring him. And I saw my grandmother. I met her for the first time. My son is her first great grandson, first great grandson. And I showed her a picture of him, and I showed her a picture of his father. Her first thing she says she doesn't speak English, so in Amharic, she's like, why so black? Like, Duriye. Duriye is like bad men, like, you know, these, like, yuck, like, this game, like, what a waste of white skin kind of thing. Like, you halfway made it. And then I'm sitting at this, like, a little bit later, I'm sitting with my cousin, my first cousin, which is also her grandson, right? And he's much darker than me. He's like, maybe like chocolate complexion, and me and him are eating vegetables. We have this like chickpea dish that I really like called shiro. But for like the middle class in Ethiopia, I think this is probably true in like other like developing nations, like to eat meat, that's like what you really do. Like if you made it, you're eating meat, right? So she's sitting a little, we have a very like, kind of like almost like caste. Everything is very hierarchical in Ethiopian culture to me. And so she's sitting a little higher on this platform, and she's eating dorowat, like this ceremonial chicken dish. And she's like, you're sitting with this Dorier eating this peasant food, like these vegetables with that black man. I mean, this is her grandson, right? And she's like, you could be eating here with me. There's light-skinned people like eating this meat. So yeah, Ethiopia has some stuff. Yeah, it has some stuff going on. But even with my grandmother, my father is the product of a union between his 75-year-old father and she was the 19-year-old wife. She was a light-skinned Garagi woman, and for this, my grandfather, who was like a black man in a position of power, is a descendant from this king, right? He was like, the thing that was in was like light-skinned women from Garagi. They're like this merchants ethnicity, you know? So they, and they're kind of like nomadic, so they were like considered like exotic. So he like ordered him this teenage wife, right? So she has like her own thing, and we don't have therapy in Ethiopia. We have like eat some chat and, you know, relax. But what I wanted to say though about your question about like self-hatred is that, you know, the reason why I share my life experiences, people see me like, oh, you're so normal, like, and I really feel indebted to the people that I left behind, and the only reason that I'm not broken is because people took a risk and reached out to me, whether it was at the school and a staff member like sneaking me in a book so that I would have something to read at the risk of losing her job, which one of them actually did. Or if it was, you know, a professor who let me audit their class, even though I didn't go to that school. You know, I always had people who like snuck me into clubs and put me on to like the latest thing in like avant-garde jazz music. I'm really grateful for those people, and I always think about who I left behind. Like one of this like kind of group home situation that I went to before the reform school, I always remember this boy, his name was Nathaniel. He's like a 5-year-old black kid, right? and we're sitting on this kind of like hospital style furniture, and he was deaf. And he used to always put his hand on his ear and like make this gurgling sound to like stimulate movement, I guess, like in his eardrum, he just wanted some stimulation. And he didn't know sign language. And so one day we're sitting next to each other. I had this like my first dictionary or something. I didn't know sign language either, so I just started making stuff up. Like it was like R Robin or something. And so I pointed to the picture and I like made this sound, like this movement. And the staff came up to us and was like arm's length away, and you know he can't hear her, so he like flipped out. And so they come up to him and they like grab him. They're like, stop, sit down. And that was the only sign language that he ever knew, right? No one bothered to take the time. He's like this kid that doesn't listen, and he's deaf, and like who the hell is over there advocating for deaf black foster kids, you know, that don't listen? And I think about like, I could tell people things that they would be like, oh my God, I can't believe it, like, you know, torture porn or something, right? But at the end of the day, I have so much access. I have the opportunity to sit here with you, you know, to sit in this space, to have not been evicted from the island, to still be here. And I really feel like a responsibility to people like Nathaniel and to people who have shared my experiences. And I think that a lot of the self-hatred comes from shame, and people don't know that this has happened to them. People don't know, like, you know, other people have been molested by their uncle or their brother, their father. Other people have been like torn apart and told not just the microaggressions, but have been told in so many different ways that they don't matter, that they should be quiet, that they serve no purpose other than to give another person pleasure. And I think that if people are more open and will take the risk to share what they're going through, maybe that will give more space to other people to take the risk to be, you know, because maybe I'm going to get fired from, just theoretically, from Cornell if I'm unapologetically black and I drape some kind of Black Lives Matter thing down the cafe and like paint bomb it, right? But maybe after me, then you could go and you could be like, hey, I think we need a grant to be like more inclusive to people in the community, right? Like, I really think about like, I try to think about, I don't think that I'm going to see radical change in my lifetime. I think in order to have radical change, you have to fully identify the problem, and people don't even want to say like vagina. They're not ready to talk about real structural racism and stuff that's happening right now. Right. But what gives me hope is that I think about how is what we're going to do impact my children's great-great-great-grandchildren, the next 15 generations. And I think we have a responsibility to our ancestors, to the people who occupy this ground that we are standing on today. And I think that our children and the hope really lies in the future generations, and we have to act now, both in acknowledgement of where we came from and what could possibly come forward. Can we create that space to come forward for the future?
One thing that I realized when I went to India was that we were the white people in India. I was basically, we were the upper socioeconomic classes. Yeah. We were lighter skinned, and there were lots of people in the lower socioeconomic. And at first I was like, this is pretty awesome, like it's pretty awesome to be like the normal empowerment. And then I started thinking about, well, who's excluded by this narrative? Who's excluded by this kind of way things are set up? And I just, and I don't know if I had grown up in India, I would have never had that experience, because I never would have had that experience of not being like the in power group, and so having that experience of not being the in power group made me realize when I went to India that, oh yeah, it's nice to be the in power group finally, but then what's happening with other people here? Like, for example, my history in India is similar to yours. My family was very affluent. They didn't have a lot of cash, but they had like land and houses and whatnot and the other thing. But then no one ever talked about who worked that land. Like it never came up in my family. It never ever came up in my family. Like, oh yeah, we owned like entire villages, but who lived in those villages? Who worked that land? Like, the only thing. Well, my grandfather was a nice guy. He was nice to them. Like that's all I got out of them. But they still took their land back. They wanted it back. So that's one thing that I definitely think like. It's all relative, and going back and forth between different cultures, you realize you sit at different places in the structure, and that gives you a different perspective on it. I mean, getting back to your question of like being in the academy, that's something I think about a lot. And I was just talking to Khadijah about it, right before you came back. I was thinking about for you, you could do something a lot more normal than what we're doing here. Like this is a kind of research project that like is really related to like you and your identity and to like things that we care about, and you could be doing normal stuff, you know?
Right. So
I would question normal versus about your identity.
But just one example.
Normative for the academy, let's say, you know, like straight ahead for our discipline. For our discipline, let's say, within our discipline. Like this is critical research in our discipline, you know, it's not like what the mainstream is in our discipline. Like this is not what most computer scientists are sitting around doing, you know?
Well, yeah.
Definitely.
In other disciplines, sure, fine. So I think it's a really quite, you know. So here, I'll just tell you my answer to it. I mean, first of all, if you wanted to conform, you're probably in the wrong research group. Because my research group has never done that. And I wouldn't know how to do that. I mean, that's just. So how did I navigate this? I mean, I was also a practical guy. You know, I was the kid of immigrants. I also wanted to be successful. I didn't want to be struggling. So how did I navigate it? I thought of myself essentially as a representative of like experiences and perspectives and identities that weren't currently represented in the academic discourse around particular ideas or topics or issues. And so I found myself in the position of going out, you know, both from my own perspective and from the perspective that I got to know and became close to people, and I found like, well, how can these people's experiences, knowledge, identities, values and vision be represented in the academic discourse around new ideas with technology? And that's how I found but you know, I never really figured out, and I'm still working it out, like who am I really trying to represent? Like at one point it was like Indian farmers, and I became really close friends with a bunch of Indian farmers, but I'm nowhere close to an Indian farmer, you know, like that's not who I am. Like it's just, you know, I can't really represent that group as authentically as I would like. And so I'm still trying to figure out like what group can I really represent? Like whose interests can I really represent in the academy? And like I would say this project and others like it are all part of that exploration for me. Like, you know, let's broaden the discourse in the academy, but at the same time, who am I really, you know, who am I really authentically able to represent? What set of interests? I think that's a question you can ask yourself too, you know, is that something that you could see yourself playing, like that kind of, and there's a lot of people that are doing it very well in the academy now, taking their own perspectives and identity and using it to represent a different set of ideas and values and perspectives in academic discourse around new technologies. Is that something you want to do or not is a question you have to ask yourself.
Definitely. That's why I'm here. But I mean, like, of course, of course I don't want to conform, right? I mean, but I've noticed that changing certain things about myself or how I present myself in the academy has led to certain results. Like, it's like, okay, I want to get here, but doing this certain thing is making it hard for me to get here. I mean, I remember when I was defending my honors thesis as a senior in college, I had one of my, I guess, advisors tell me that slavery wasn't so bad in America because sometimes slaves got paid. And I wanted to cry. Like, I couldn't, right? But I was like sitting here, like, I was so angry. Like, I was just like, yo, like, damn.
What's your undergrad degree in?
Near Eastern Studies. So, anyway, that's not, the point is, like, you know, of course, this person didn't want to give me my honors after this, right? I couldn't even like talk straight. But I mean, like, I don't know, just like doing certain things
that's not your fault.
No, it's not. But I do realize that
it's choices you have to make.
Right. I mean, like, but I do realize certain actions get certain results, and if I want to get in certain spaces, like, you know, if I gotta, you know, adapt a little bit, conform a little bit just to get in a space, I'll do it.
Yeah.
Like.
No, I hear you. You know, one thing I used to do
just to get access to that information and resources.
So then you have an agenda, right? But then sometimes you have to wear a mask or you have to act a certain way. And when you spend more of your time making decisions that lead you there, or more of your time wearing that mask, like, who do you really become? Are you the person with the mask, or are you the person without it, right? And like, how do you negotiate that?
Definitely.
I think that's part of
Definitely.
it. But I was gonna say I have the reversed feeling. So I feel, coming from outside of academia, my feeling is that those who are in power represent like a totally different set of interests than me. I don't even like entertain half the people that I interact with. I feel like their interests are like rooted deeply in opposition to not just mine personally, but like the group of people for whom which I affiliate myself with, right? And I really, like, when I go into most spaces, I feel like I really love that story about the Pullman porters. Do you know what the story is? Mm-hmm. So it's like when the trains were really segregated, right? And they didn't allow black people to ride in the trains, but they would allow them to work in there. There was the Pullman porters. So then what the porters would do is when they were cleaning up, like say after the white people left, and they would leave behind records and books and stuff like that, they would redistribute to the people in their neighborhood, because just being on that train gave them access to resources that people who were still working in the field, still sharecropping, didn't have, right? And I really see it and feel it like that, and I don't even necessarily feel sad that other people didn't make it maybe to this book reading or to this academic conference, because on the flip side, like we were talking about culture, like I think about like what is British food, Indian food, you know what I mean? Like they don't even have, I mean, like fish and chips maybe, like, but like
curry is the official food of Britain now. I think
yeah,
or something.
I mean, I just
curry's not even a thing. First of all, when people say curry, we're like, what the fuck is that? Curry is not a thing. There's no such thing as curry.
Well, I'll never let it go. Like earlier this year, New York Times had a thing about like we discovered the wraps meatball or something, but it was like a wonton. And it was like, no, you did not discover wontons. Like people been eating that.
People ask me what's curry. I'm like, I don't know. Never had it.
And so the thing is, like, even like how we talk, like African American vernacular. This is what I was saying about the Middle Passages and like how to break people and stuff. And you think about like 12, 13-year-olds, all of a sudden you packed on a boat, and it's like there was nobody organizing. Here, let's figure out how are we going to address the situation.
People speak different languages. I mean, coming from different tribes,
people speak all different, but
yeah.
they weren't even fully formed adults yet. They didn't even know all the rites of passages, and all of a sudden, you know, whether it was through rape or through the comfort of interacting or somebody they legitimately wanted to be with, they had a baby, and they had to like figure out rituals over time and stuff. And I guess what my point is, in the absence of having like a formal structure to preserve culture, and in the face of systematic torture, disenfranchisement, like incarceration, all types of medical experimentation, at the end of the day, you could go right now somewhere in Atlanta and be like, he be wildin', right? And like people don't realize that might be a signifier for being uneducated, right? But you could trace that syntax, that noun-verb agreement, to a specific point in time on this coast of Africa, right? Like we are amazing, right?
That's right.
And they mad. Like I think it's fear. And they mad. Like I was telling her, like Paul Mooney has this thing. I read the white book now, y'all, and there was no chapter on escaping. They mad. They never gonna get over that. Like that even let me tell you, that school that I went to, I never conformed. I want to put it on my bathroom so I can see when I pee. I have this letter from when I left, and it said, she has never accepted the token economy. She will be a failure in life. We are very disappointed about her decision to transfer to another program. You know, if she had taken some, and you know, it's anger. So mad, right? And like pettiness is part of what motivates me, because it's like you need these little moments of that anger, right? And I feel like that anger is my, like, they don't want to see us succeed sometimes. I feel like that
all the time.